Hey everybody, it's Cam from the Nerd Book Review. Today I'll be reviewing Empire's Daughter by Marian Thorpe. It is 347 pages long and was published in 2015. It is the first book in a series that, of course, I did not write down before I started this. I'll throw the actual name up there, but it is there's several books out in that series at this point. It is definitely a different book for me. It's not really even all that much of a fantasy book. It's military history, but it is set on a secondary world. Think like Greek empire level technology. So before the Romans is kind of the feel I got. We're dealing with a small village for most of the time, and that there's only even one city in this empire. It's kind of, I'll talk about, the way it's split up here a little bit. Definitely a bit of a unique book compared to some of the other things I've read. Let's go ahead and read the book blurb, and here you can see up there where my thoughts will end up. But I think that we'll get to my thoughts here pretty quick, interspersed within it. And it's definitely a little bit of a unique world. So if you've not read the book, I think at least hearing my world building part would be a good idea for this episode. Okay, let's go ahead and do that book blurb. But the world changes. In all the women's villages of the empire, this week or next, a soldier like myself will arrive to ask to live in the village to take up a trade. But the world changes. In all the women's villages of the empire, this week or next, a soldier like myself will arrive to ask to live in the village, to take up a trade. Kaysen paused for a breath, a heartbeat, and to teach you and your daughters to fight. With those words, the lives of Lena, fisherwoman of Turvan village, and her partner Maya change irrevocably. Torn apart by their responses to this request, Maya chooses exile. Lena chooses to stay to defend her village and the empire. Although the rules of the partition assembly many generations earlier had divided and circumscribed the lives of men and women appointed to leadership, Lena's concepts of love and loyalty are challenged as she learns the skills of warfare and in the aftermath of battle faces the consequences of her choices. Leaving Turvan to search for Maya, Lena is drawn into the intrigues and politics of the empire, forcing her to examine what she most truly believes in. All right, that Goodreads review book blurb is very, very long and very, very detailed and gives basically most of the plot line. The important things, like I've already mentioned, this world technology-wise, we're not dealing with any crazy tech, Greek level is what I would have said for the most part. Also, we're not dealing with any magic at all in this world, so that's not an important note. The big thing to this whole world is simply that 200 years prior, men and women voted to split apart. Men only enter the women's villages for 1 week every 6 months. At that point, they will do the things that men and women do to make babies. But aside from that, from the time a boy basically is 7 years old until he is 55, I think is the age they give, they will live apart, and they'll all be in the army. Choosing not to go to the army has some pretty crazy consequences. You can be castrated. You will be basically a cast-off. You could potentially be no more than a slave, basically. So almost every man will become a soldier, and they will be a soldier for their entire lives. Now, like I said, this was done 200 years prior to the story taking place. Basically, the men wanted to continue expanding their empire, and they wanted to basically take over the entire continent. The women were tired of fighting, is kind of the feeling I got, and they voted against it. So basically the women decided that they weren't going to do any more fighting. So now, Lena and Maya, they're a couple, they're partners. Obviously, most of the people who are couples in this one are going to be same sex as a result because, it's only women living in these villages. They do all of the jobs that, maybe a man would have traditionally done. But so, Maya's a fisherwoman, everything from the blacksmith to, everything. There is only women. From the age of 7 on, there's no man in these women's villages. The men go off to fight, and they do their thing. Now, what happens, though, is that they find out there's a plot from another country that is going to try to take over and steal the food, especially from the women's villages, because they are dealing with overcrowding on their island, which is off the coast. And so, as a result, the emperor sends out soldiers to all of the women's villages. They vote to basically all of the villages vote that they're going to allow the men to train them, and that the women will take up arms and defend themselves. That's basically the whole plot point of the book. Now, as mentioned in the book blurb, the battle, so the way this story goes is that first there's training. That's about the first 35-ish% of the book. And then pretty, early on, the battle itself happens. Now, obviously, going that far into the things is a little bit on the spoilery side, but I feel like it's kind of important in this case because like 60% almost of the book, a big chunk of it, at least 55%, is Lena then going on a journey to find Maya, and then she ends up talking to a bunch of other people, and there's a whole like politics and intrigue thing. But the main like battle scene, really the only battle scene at all, is pretty early in the book, and from there on out, we're going to have that journey scene that you see in a lot of books. So let's go ahead right now. Jesus, it's raining. It's raining very, very hard outside my house right now. Okay, let's go ahead real quick, talk about it's a one point of view character. Lena is her name. She's only 19 years old. She's a really good character. She's, got a lot of common sense. She's been a fisherwoman. Her partner, she is her lover, is a woman named Maya, who is very against the idea of women fighting, and she will leave the village because of this. But Lena will be appointed as a cohort leader, as they're called. And she will be in charge of basically like covert ops within the village. So her group of women will fight with knives and hide, and they're there in case the people that are invading them manage to get past the first line of defense. So it's one of those things where, you will see a little bit of fighting, but for the most part, and Lena's, she's the only point of view character. Let's go ahead and talk the bad, the good, and my final thoughts then. I know that, this is going through pretty fast, but I think that it's really not a big deal because, when you don't have to deal with like a big magic system, that takes that part of my usual review away, and you don't have to deal with like a bunch of crazy convoluted politics or anything like that. It's just the whole thing is whether men and women are going to potentially ever get back together, and live together. And, the ideas between some women who want to fight and those who don't. Now, as far as the bad goes, this is, like I mentioned, about 45% in is the only real action that takes place in the entire book. They will do a lot of training in the first half, that first 40-ish%, but there's not not a ton of combat. It's a lot of training sequences, basically. And then once you get past that one battle scene, then it's basically just a long journey. So if you're looking for a lot of action, this is definitely not going to be a book that would appeal to you, I don't think. Now, the second big thing, at least for me as a fantasy reader, especially epic fantasy and grimdark, there's no magic at all. This is not a world where magic has ever existed or potentially could exist. It is a standard. Like I said, I had a really Greek feel about it. I don't know where we're exactly at technology-wise. It did say there was steel, so I guess it's more like a Roman era period. But for the women that we're going to deal with, they're not armed or armored, and the people that they end up fighting, it doesn't seem like they're armored either. So basically for the most part, like people are wearing like leather armor if they're wearing any at all. Now they do fight with swords and bows and things like that, but certainly nothing advanced. Then the one last thing I think could have been an issue was just the whole concept of like the women train with swords, but they've never, fought with swords in the past. And I don't know why I thought of this one, but as a general rule, you'd have thought they would have been like trained with spears or something like that, because I've always been taught that like swordplay is something that you need to start off with young to really be good at it. But it doesn't really end up being a big issue, and even like the people they're fighting against, it's not really something that bugged me past the initial thought process. But the biggest thing is just that if you're looking for something that's not almost entirely character driven, then this probably won't be the story for you. Now, getting into the good, the characters that we deal with a lot, they're pretty good characters. Lena is a great main character. She, even though she's only 19, she's very capable from the very beginning. She has her own fishing boat. She's been training since she was young to be a fisherwoman. She's very strong. They're independent. Like, obviously, women don't exist to be men's love interests in this book, since for the most part, it's just women, right? The man, Kaysen, the soldier who addresses them and then ends up training them, he's older. So it's not like he was never like a possible love interest of them either, since Lena's like 19 and I think Kaysen's in his 50s. So it's one of those things, right, where if you want a almost entirely woman-dominated book, then this is something that I think that you should look for. If that's not your thing, then obviously not. But we're dealing with like really capable women all the time, so we're not dealing with any real weakness. Even the women that choose not to fight, like they're really principled in their decision on why. Like Maya, she believes in that partition, and she's had to have her brother leave. Usually women won't have children so close together as her and her brother ended up being, and so she was really upset that her brother had to go and become a soldier. And so as a result, she really sticks to that idea of partition, that if the reason her brother had to leave and couldn't stay in the village was because of these rules, well, then the Empire can't now make the women fight and split away from that partition, because if that's the case, then her brother left for no reason because he didn't want to go either, right? So definitely, there's a little bit, like, I really do feel like because women have never had to rely on men at all, that the women are all strong in this book. The other thing is that if you want that character-driven, relationship-driven book where it's not just all about like romantic relationships, and the relationships that we deal with are potentially like changing people's whole viewpoints and outlooks on life, this does that really, really well. Also, just the one last thing, I found that it was really easy to read. I read the entire book, all 347 pages, in one day. So obviously, despite it being, like fairly slow at times, I found that it really flowed. I got into that movie in my mind almost immediately. So now my final thoughts. By all accounts, I should have really disliked this book. I like books with lots of action. Generally, my least favorite part of any book, especially when I'm reading a series, I'm always going to rate the book that has the journey as the lowest rated of my books. And this one is, like more than half of the book is basically Lena on a journey. And also, like, there's not really a lot of fighting. I don't know. I should have really disliked this book. But I found the book pretty darn entertaining. I'm going to give it a 7.5. Obviously, I'm not, calling this a book of the year. But if you want like a strong woman-dominated book, I don't know what percentage of my audience is female over male, but I think that this is, it's a pretty darn good book. It's enjoyable. I don't think that I'm going to recommend this one to a ton of people, especially because I think most people, when you're watching my reviews especially, like every episode generally go in detail on that magic system, right? That's kind of what normally will bring me into a book. This book was recommended to me by somebody when I was asking for some good female author recommendations. And so, it's probably not something that I would have chosen on my own, but I really enjoyed reading it. I had a good time in an afternoon. I mean, like I said, it was really easy to read for me, and it was something that was a little bit unique, right? That whole idea of partition of men living with men and women with women. There wasn't really, so gods are mentioned in the book, but there's absolutely no priesthood or priestesshood in this one. So that kind of takes away that whole, a lot of the prescriptions or a lot of the like prohibitions that people would have against, like same-sex relationships. Because let's be honest, most of the time, when there really is something against same-sex relationships, it's generally religion-based, just like it is in our own world. If you get away from like the Abrahamic or monotheistic religions even, then homosexuality is generally not seen as a big of a deal. And so, that makes sense when you're not dealing with that, like that priesthood like that. All in all, I found this one to be, like I said, a 7.5. That's just a perfectly enjoyable book. Nothing like super special to me, but I think for the people that are wanting like a woman or a female dominated series, then I would definitely recommend this book. I don't know that I'm going to carry on reading more of the books anytime soon. I think that the biggest thing for me was just that whole no magic thing. I don't know. I'm a fantasy reader and I like my magic. I will say that, as far as like military history books, this is probably military history light, if you will. But all in all, I'm glad that the book was recommended to me. I had never heard of Marian L. Thorpe before, so she's now on my radar. And, as another option for recommendations for people. I hope you guys enjoyed my review. I hope you have a wonderful time reading, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.